Bush administration. The Saudis have been very resistant to exhortation, and these governments have also been very displeased with U.S. support through the institutions that you mentioned in the past.
Well, interesting. Rice and the Bush administration in general reversed their policy pretty soon thereafter and refused to even say anything about Noor or others in subsequent visits. And yeah, I think they were stung by what happened in the Palestinian parliamentary elections with Hamas, even though that, those of you who know Palestine, it was unique to that situation given the corruption and autocratic rule of Fatah and the occupation and a bunch of other things. It was certainly not emblematic of what would have happened elsewhere in the region. I think part of it is first do no harm, and I think not providing the tear gas and the water cannons and the the kind of the security assistance that's used to repress these suppress pro-democracy. I mean, I think just making security assistance conditional to respect for internationally recognized human rights is critical. So I think that would be the main thing. Generally, I think given the history of the United States, U.S. in the Middle East, I think it's probably better that we not be very proactive. I mean, I think as much as I sympathize with the Green Revolution, I think that Obama was right and McCain was wrong in saying, regarding how open the United States should have been in terms of supporting the movement, because I mean, if you look at our history in Iran, we overthrew the last democratic government the country had back in the 50s. We supported the Shah and his Savak and the brutal repression for a quarter century. We've threatened regime change, and we have invaded the countries on that to Iran's immediate east and west in recent years. So, any kind of support for the more open support for the pro-democracy struggle would play right into the regime's hands. And indeed, the more genuine Iranian dissidents were upset at this, $70 million of congressional funding to Iranian opposition groups. I mean, outside of a few Iranian Americans in LA, I think most people were pretty skeptical of that whole project in the first place. So I think again, given the history in the Middle East, I think it'd be better if the U.S. took a more cautious, hands-off approach, simply because it could be used by autocrats to their advantage. I mean, this is different than Eastern Europe. In Eastern Europe, the U.S. was largely seen as a friend of democracy because the outside power supporting their oppression was the Soviets. But in the Middle East, we've been the main obstacle in terms of foreign powers and democracy. So given that history, I think it's best that we just do what we can to encourage civic space, and then hope that the people themselves can take advantage of that to move forward. Yeah.
For years, you've been an observer of the Moroccan scene and Algerian scene, and one of the things that we've seen, for at least the last 10 years or last 12 years, is that most of the political dissent within Moroccan universities, especially public universities, especially in Agadir, Marrakesh, recently Rabat, is the Sahrawi dissent within universities. Recently, in post-Egyptian, especially Tunisian uprising, there has been an uprising within Tindouf among the youth against the establishment of the polystyrene leadership. What's your take on that?
Well, interesting that when Moroccan universities, you do have obviously the Sahrawis who are both struggling in terms of their nationalist cause, but also on perceived discrimination. In some cases, they started to make common cause with Moroccans who want to open up their system as well. We saw a similar thing actually in Indonesia, where you had East Timorese students at Indonesian universities, making common cause with the people struggling against Suharto. And I think that's continuing, and I think as pro-democracy movements grow in Morocco, I think though for the first time there might be more open debate about the situation in the Sahara. Tindouf, there's been interesting history there. I mean, there was a major pro-democracy uprising in the 89, 90, 91 in there against the Polisario leadership. The camps, on the one hand, there was a fair amount of a pluralism in civil society to a limit, in terms of some of the participatory democratic institutions, but the big decisions were always top down. And they had their own essential intifada, if you will, protests that were initially suppressed, but grew and maintained their nonviolent discipline, and led to the abolition of the Politburo, the establishment of the Independent Human Rights Commission. In fact, one of the leaders of that protest is now the Prime Minister of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. But it didn't, obviously didn't go far enough, and in certain areas there's been slight retrenchment in terms of liberties. We're starting to see more protests again, and it's fascinating to me because I don't know of any situation of an exiled armed liberation struggle where, when you did have dissent against the leadership, they engaged in nonviolent protests, and in some cases, though again not enough in my view, they've won some concessions, major concessions, and because in most cases, ends up they get a rival armed liberation group, or they end up shooting each other, or it gets really crazy. So I mean, I think there's a, but like the Palestinians, I think they see whatever issues they have with their own leadership, that still the main issue is the occupation, and that's still still the priority. But my view is the more democracy you have in Morocco, in Algeria, in the Polisario controlled camps, and anywhere else, the better.
It's widely claimed that the U.S. Told the Egyptian army that if they, open fire on people, like in Tahrir Square, for example, that they could no longer have the same relations with them, and that's why the military decided to push Mubarak out.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if there's any truth?
Yeah, my understanding from my sources actually is indeed that was the word that came down. That and like for one thing, if U.S. weapons are seen engaging in that kind of massacre, you can imagine what it would mean in terms of the way U.S. is viewed in that part of the world. So it was very much on a very pragmatic level, not just a moral level, for the Obama administration to make it clear. But at the same time, I would argue that even without that, I don't think they would have gotten away with it, because again, I don't think the rank and file soldiers would have done so. If anything, they would have turned their guns on their commanding officers rather than shoot their own people like that. So the answer is yes. There's a fair amount of evidence to suggest that to the Obama administration's credit, that is exactly what they did. But I don't think that's the only reason why it didn't happen. I'm sorry. I just remember something that's important. I should have mentioned in response to your question. There's been there's a growing split in certain ways within the nonviolent resistance movement in the occupied Western Sahara and the Polisario. The Moroccan line is all these protests these are all Polisario agents, and some of the people in the movement are indeed clandestine members of the Polisario, but a lot of them are not, and especially since it's a younger generation largely that's come of age, since the Moroccan occupation, exile, and Polisario in many ways is a generational dispute. Polisario want to be the ones in charge of the whole movement, whereas younger people are saying, hey, you're not here, we're here. We're the ones who are suffering under occupation. And in fact, there have been a number of occasions where the Polisario said, hey, you guys cool it, we're in a sensitive diplomatic period right now, and the youth are saying, what do we mean? This is, we have this struggle here. And so I think in certain ways, just as the First Intifada and the Black consciousness movement in South Africa, while they are willing to,